belongs to us.
I hate this word concessions. How can you steal somebody's land and be talked about?
But
The BBC even uses this word. It's always concessions.
But one has to understand, this is the mentality.
Ilan, just take a historical perspective. Is there not a case for saying that the real villains in the story since 1967 are actually the governments of the major Western powers, the one in Washington, D.C. especially, for allowing Israel to defy international law by settling occupied territory? For Ilan's answer to that big question, and others, you'll have to join me for part 2 of my conversation with him next week. I think it's worth recalling one particular observation he made. He said that what was probably more surprising than anything else was not the silence of the world as Zionist ethnic cleansing was taking place in Palestine, but the silence of the Jews in Palestine. They knew what had happened to Jews in Nazi Europe, he said, and some of them might have seen it for themselves. Yet they had no scruples in doing almost the same to the Palestinians. That's all for this week. From this heart to yours, good night. Welcome to Heart of the Matter, the programme which is committed to telling you the truth about who must do what and why if the Palestine problem, the cancer at the heart of international affairs, is to be cured before it consumes us all. This evening we have the second part of my conversation with Professor Ilan Pappe, the truth-telling Israeli historian whose latest book is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. In last week's programme, the first part of our conversation ended with a question from me, and we'll continue with it this evening. Ilan, to take a historical perspective, is there not a case for saying that the real villains in the story since 1967 are actually the governments of the major Western powers, the one in Washington, D.C. especially, for allowing Israel to defy international law by settling occupied territory?
Yes, I totally agree. I think that it was probably difficult in '67 to demand a deconstruction of the 1948 situation. It was much more difficult, yep. I agree. But definitely after '67, when the Israeli occupation was formed, and it was so easy to see what they were doing on the ground, and that they were violated very clear international law regulations and United Nations resolution, I agree that they were the main culprits, because the reality of the occupation was created with a very close watch by the Western powers, who knew what was going on and allowed it for their own reasons.
What you're saying is, in the aftermath of the '67 war, had the major powers, led by America, simply read the Riot Act to Israel and said, we've got to sort out the peace, but we are not going to allow you to build settlements. As a complete violation of international law.
At least they could have not solved the Palestine problem as it is, but they could have eased the life of the people who fell under Israeli occupation in 1967.
Could we also say they could have stopped the Palestine problem from becoming unmanageable, perhaps?
Maybe yes, definitely.
Ilan, how would you characterize Israeli policy today? I mean the policy it is implementing as opposed to its public policy statements.
I think the Israeli policies are aimed at completing what Israelis would call the Zionist project, which is securing a final map of the State of Israel with a clear ethnic reality in it. Starting from the north, I don't think they have yet settled on the northern border with Lebanon. I think they're still hoping to get the Litani River.
To the Litani.
To the Litani River. They don't know exactly how to do it. Whereas I think that in the Golan Heights, they are willing to have some sort of a territorial compromise with the Syrians. In the West Bank, we already talked about it, but repeated, it's very important. They want to ethnically cleanse half of the West Bank in order not to change the balance of the demographic balance inside what they would call the Jewish state. But even that is not the end of the story, I think, because there are too many Palestinians in Israel.
My view, it picks up from where you left off, is that Zionism's own end-game strategy now leaves nothing to the imagination. Israel's leaders believe that by means of brute force and reducing them to abject poverty, they can break the will of the Palestinians to continue the struggle for their rights. The assumption being that at a point, out of total despair, the Palestinians will be prepared to say, okay, we'll accept crumbs from Zionism's table. The question that's almost too awful to think about is this: what will the Zionists do? Bearing in mind what you said in your previous answer, what will the Zionists do when it becomes apparent even to them that they can't destroy Palestinian nationalism, bombs and bullets and brutal repressive measures? My guess is that they, the Zionists, will go for a final round of ethnic cleansing to drive the Palestinians off the West Bank into Jordan and beyond. That, I fear, will be Zionism's final solution to the Palestine problem. And if it happens, the West Bank will be turned red with blood, mostly Palestinian blood. And if there be any honest reporters, they would describe it as a Zionist Holocaust. Ilan, do you think that's too pessimistic a view of a possible future if a Zionist-dictated course is followed?
I think it has ingredients of what I think will happen. I think what will happen is only in part. I don't think the Zionist movement, or let's call it the State of Israel, the State of Israel doesn't need the kind of scenario that you described. I think what it needs is two clear situations in the West Bank. One is a part that is totally annexed to them, and there may be through bloodshed or maybe without bloodshed. Palestinians are quite weakened now. They would get a free ride in a way to nobody stopping them to annex these areas to Israel and ethnically cleanse the Palestinians who live there. But I don't think they would, at least the majority of them in the leadership, would mind seeing a Palestinian enclave surrounded by huge high wall and electric fences, very much as in the Gaza Strip, existing, especially if they could convince the Palestinian leadership to keep it as a state that doesn't disturb them. However, if this would be impossible, maybe what you described could be the second phase.
It was Moshe Dayan, Israel's one-eyed warlord, who said, "It's them or us." Could it not be said that those three little words, them or us, tell us everything, and particular that the hardest core Zionists do not have a category of thought that enables them to seriously consider making an accommodation with the Palestinians? I mean an accommodation acceptable to the